Burglars have been given free rein to ransack houses across Britain. That's according to former Victims Commissioner Dame Vera Baird, who has slammed police forces in England and Wales for failing to solve burglary cases in nearly half the country. Analysis of police data shows no burglaries were solved in 48% of neighbourhoods in the past 3 years, with hotspots in West Yorkshire and Hertfordshire the worst hits. This comes as small shopkeepers report a five-fold increase in shoplifting cases over a single year, rocketing to more than 5 million thefts in 2023. Joining me now is Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley Police. Good afternoon, Matthew. My first question is, what are you seeing? You work with the police closely. What are you seeing on the ground there when it comes to burglaries?
So I think it's quite interesting. The two issues you discuss are in many ways very different, although they might seem to be linked. So in terms of burglaries, I agree. I think the figures are really disappointing. Frankly, the police across the country do need to do better at bringing those criminals to justice. But, and this is a big but, we also need to look at crime prevention. So certainly in my force area in Thames Valley, but I think this is true in many places across the country, burglary rates are down significantly. So from 2019 to where we are today, burglary is down about 37% on that time, and they were pretty low in 2019. So I don't want to diminish the impact of the crime. If you're a victim of burglary, it impacts you hugely. It's a really important crime that the police need to deal with properly. But the reality is, in places like Thames Valley, you're actually incredibly unlikely to be a victim of burglary. And that is a success story in itself, but it doesn't mean that we don't need to be pursuing those criminals that continue to prey on victims.
Matthew, what is it you're doing in Thames Valley then that is being so successful?
Well, I think that change in the long-term trend on burglaries, I don't think that's just in Thames Valley. I think we see that in other places. Certainly, the way we live our lives now has changed. That makes a difference, the levels of home security. But what actually we need to focus on is those few prolific offenders. And what I think is often hidden in some of these statistics is that you may have a series of burglaries in an area, perhaps 10 offences that take place. If the police can catch someone, get them into court, they may only end up in court for one or two of those burglaries, because that's perhaps where the evidence takes the police. That's where you've got enough evidence to convince the CPS to charge. But we all know that if that series of burglaries then stops, that person was clearly responsible for the other 8. And so those crimes go unsolved in the statistics. But ultimately, the burglar's behind bars, and that's where they need to be. So the numbers matter. I think there is more the police need to do to deal with this. But actually, what we should have is just a forensic focus on those most dangerous, most prolific offenders, because they'll be causing the greatest harm. And if we can identify them and get them behind bars, that will make a big difference to the public.
OK, but what are the police officers saying? Are they not embarrassed when they hear these numbers? How is it possible that half of these crimes are not being solved? Surely the officers are walking around with their heads hung in absolute shame.
As I said, I think there is an awful lot more for forces to do. I think it's interesting when you talk about at the start the shoplifting compared with burglary, because again, very different issue in terms of shoplifting. We've got a challenge there where shoplifting goes hugely underreported, and we've launched a retail crime strategy in Thames Valley over the last couple of months. We're starting to see some big results, but I've said very publicly, I want shoplifting figures in Thames Valley to go up. Because at the moment, I know not enough retailers are reporting it. The only way we'll know we're having impact is if those retailers have the confidence to report to the police. That will mean that in the short term, crime goes up. But at the moment, we're also seeing charges increase. So we've got, I think, about an 82% increase in charges for shoplifting in Thames Valley in the last 12 months. That's starting to make a big difference. But it's about building that confidence, particularly of businesses, to report crime.
So how high do you prioritise things like shoplifting and burglary? I own a small shop. I call up and say, I've been robbed. They've taken 3 TVs out the front window and some mobile phones. Can you come down, please? People are telling us that cops aren't even turning up to these crime scenes anymore.
I think they're hugely important crimes. The reason they matter so much is because it's the sort of thing that will impact people in their day-to-day lives. There are some awful, hideous crimes that the police must deal with, and of course, things like the child abuse and the domestic abuse that we all know goes on behind closed doors. We all want the police to deal with those, but they are behind closed doors. And actually, most people in their daily lives most people won't be victims of crime, but if they are, it's that real life instance in of a shop of a home burglary. That's the stuff that people are concerned about. So it really matters. In terms of the response, I'm really clear with the police that I expect a better response than we've seen in the past, and we're certainly delivering that in Thames Valley with that increase in charges. But we also need to have a really clear dialogue with retailers. So in Thames Valley, we've got a new dedicated team of retail crime investigators who will focus on those prolific offenders, who will be looking for the patterns of offending, because again, we see a relatively small number of people committing a large amount of crime. And so actually by focusing on them, getting the retailers to send their CCTV in quickly, getting them to report quickly, and actually often you need to have a police officer there to turn up, but you don't always. And I've had a really, really useful conversation with lots of retailers where they say that if there's a crime in progress, it's like if one of your staff is threatened, if something's happening now, call 999 and I expect the police to turn up. But actually, if you find at the end of the day you've got some stock missing and you found some footage on CCTV, you don't need a police officer to turn up for that. You need to report it. You need to get a link to upload the CCTV. That actually will mean that your crime can be investigated quicker by the right people with less use of those resources. So it's about setting a realistic expectation.
Matthew, final question for you, mate. Are the police in this country fit for purpose? Because they've lost the trust. We as a public, if I see a crime, I'm not going to bother reporting it unless it's something really serious and heinous, because I don't believe they're going to turn up. We hear our shop owners saying the same thing. People now are going to hear about this and say, right, if I get burgled, I might get a crime reference number, but that's going to be it. The criminal will keep on walking around. And then we know that in courts and with the CPS, the charges for burglaries are going down, not going up. Are the police fit for purpose anymore?
Yes, I think they are. I see some fantastic work by police officers day in and day out across Thames Valley. I know that's replicated across the country. There are definitely some challenges around confidence. Some of that, frankly, is tackling some of the messages in the media, which are relentlessly negative about policing. And it's quite right to challenge the police. That's my role, to challenge the police when they get things wrong. But actually, there is some fantastic work. I've touched on, as an example, around that shoplifting, where we're starting to have a real impact. But without confidence, without a community that embraces the police, that without a community that wants to report things, that wants to fix those problems, if as a society we turn a blind eye to some of that offending, to some of the antisocial behaviour that goes on, to some of the drug taking that happens in our communities, if we're turning a blind eye, that is not just a problem for policing. That's a wider problem for us as a country and as a society. So I think we need to recognise that the police are just citizens in uniform. They have a key role to play in doing this. We all should want a safer society. And from my role as Police and Crime Commissioner, I'm determined to make the police do what they need to do and improve their performance where they can, but also working closely with the public, with retailers, with businesses, to make it as easy as possible to report, to make it quicker and easier to get through to the police, and start bridging that gap, because it shouldn't be an us and them. We're all on the same side here. The ones that we should be fighting against is the criminals.
Matthew, Barber, thank you so much for your time. It would be great if all crime commissioners across the country were as organised and driven as you are. Thanks very much.